Today, we are going to talk about the Canon EOS Rebel T series of camera bodies and lenses. We're going to talk about a stock camera straight off of the shelf, what you can and can't do with it. We're going to look at the kind of quality and the images you can expect from this. And I'm going to give a little testimony to the durability of this little guy right here because I have subjected this to plethora abuses in the last 2 years, and it's still doing a pretty darn good job for me. So it's going to be an overall overview of this series of camera. First thing out of the box, who is this camera for? Well, if you are here watching this right now, I'm betting dollars to donuts that you are an aspiring amateur photographer who found that they love taking pictures with their phone or their cool pics, point and shoot like most people do. And the very logical next step is to get a camera you can actually do some things with. This is a prosumer, middle of the road type of camera. Nikon has their middle of the road cameras. Kodak will. There's a lot of them out there in the $300 to $700 range, and they're all solid cameras. This review is about this camera because this is what I bought and I own. This is not an endorsement of Canon or a knock on Nikon. Actually, Nikon makes some really great stuff. A lot of people live and die by it, as do people with Canon. But this middle of the road stuff, the reason you're here and researching this camera most likely is because you got online, typed some stuff in the Google box, and looked at those cameras that come in the professional range and said, my first car didn't cost that much. And so this is the logical choice. So let's talk about what you can and cannot do with one of these middle of the road cameras first and foremost. All right, so let's look at what all you can do with this. You got all your presets up here, like portrait, landscape, micro, sports settings. You got a lot of things you can do. Video, of course. Come up here. This is the one I think we're most interested in. It's going to be manual. You want to know what you can do with this camera that you can't do with your iPhone or your Android. You do have a full range of settings that you can work with here. So here, go up, and you've got your shutter speed. I was shooting some long exposures, so we're over 1.5 seconds there. You can roll up, roll down, pick your shutter speed, manually set your aperture, your f-stops, which is going to play a huge role in doing landscape and long exposure. Set your ISO, the amount of light you're allowing in. You can set it to auto or you can set it low for long exposure. Or if you're doing night photography, you can go up here into the higher, 3200, 6400. You have all the functionality of a larger professional camera for the most part, but it is going to have its limitations. You're paying $350 versus $1,350. There's going to be a difference, but I'm going to show you here some of the examples of the kind of photography you can do with this camera. All right, the first thing I want to look at, if we're going to give you some examples of the quality of pictures you can get from this particular camera, mine is the T6. There's two newer generations since then. I think they're on a T8 for these Rebel cameras specifically. This is a T6, a couple of years old now. But this first picture, we're going to look at the sharpness and the clarity. And this picture is Manresa State Beach, or it's La Selva, one of the two. I can't remember. It's been a couple of years. Which is in Central California. It's on the coast there. And a little HDR heavy in the clouds. I was still learning about editing pictures back then. But if you look at the sand, there's so much clarity. This thing is tack sharp on the little grains of sand and going out into the wave that's about to break on the beach. Next picture is going to be the static display of the Studebaker on the old Route 66 alignment in the Petrified Forest National Park in Arizona. Took it a couple of years ago. I really loved the sharpness, the contrast, and the sharpness that came out in that picture. And this final picture is a really weird little ground squirrel. Was eating a Dorito, nacho cheese, as you can see, that was given to him by a really naked hippie chick. that day on the beach there. I did not take a picture of her because that would be creepy. But the squirrel was really cute. And here you can see how like it's just tack sharp. You can see the grains of sand. You can see his like little individual hairs, the texture of the chip. But so those are all examples of really sharp pictures that came out of this Canon Rebel EOS Rebel T6. Now let's look at some of the things you can do with it. Because this was a big question I had early on: is what the heck can you do with this camera? As far as long exposure, like moving water, astrophotography, and you can do that with this camera within reason. So let's look at some examples of that now. This very first example, this is going to be some long exposure, and all of this is given the understanding you need to understand you're using a tripod for this. Okay. This very first picture is going to be Pam's Grotto, which is in the Arkansas Ozarks. This is from behind the waterfall, under the grotto, looking out, under the overhang, looking out. And this one just came out really great. This is only a couple of months old, this picture, so this camera is still taking good quality photos after all the abuse I've put it through, which I'm going to talk about towards the end of the video here. This second photo we're looking at, this is Quivala Elise Falls. This is in Buffalo National River territory, just down from Ponca, just a little ways. This is one of my favorite long exposures that I've personally taken, because the way the moss and the rocks is really popping there against the water. I always really liked this one. And this next one is going to be from Mammoth Spring, which is in way up in northeast Arkansas, right on the Missouri border. Huge hole in the ground, pumping out 9.5 million gallons of water an hour. It's like the third largest hot spring in the United States, I believe. And yeah, I took this picture just after sunset. See, so these are things you need to understand too. This is where you start getting into this camera. This is stock, what we're talking about. I didn't have any gels. That's the film version. The filters, it didn't have any filters. That was just with like a CPL filter, which is not a neutral density filter, which is what you really need to get good long exposure in broad daylight. So you have to learn how to use like overcast skies, dusk and dawn. You have to learn about how to use the camera, which I think is a great actual perk to these middle of the road cameras, is you have to learn some of the art, some of the science to get good pictures when you go with one of these. You can't just buy your way straight into insta fame, so to speak. But yeah, all of these were taken with that in mind, like having to use natural lighting and learn how to use natural lighting. But all of those came from this camera, stock off the shelf, with like a $20 CPL circular polarizer screw-on filter. Next, let's look at a shot of the Milky Way, because this is a long exposure shot as well. I was really curious about astrophotography when I got into this. This is what I wanted to do. Learned quickly that it is, pardon the pun, astronomical, the amount of money you have to spend to get into like the really, really stunning stuff you see, the kind of stuff that just pops off the screen. There you're talking about people who are getting into stacking softwares, taking multiple pictures, and then the software lines them up, gets really deep, a lot of light exposure that way, or motorized tracking tripod heads that follow the rotation of the stars as it goes and can do 20, 30, 40 minute, however long you want, exposures of the same area of the sky. That stuff gets prohibitively expensive. So what can you do with this camera straight out of the box? The best thing I've ever been able to do is this picture that you're going to look at right now. This picture was in a designated dark sky park, which the Buffalo National River area is. It's a national park area. This is a shot of the Milky Way. You can see a shooting star just starting towards the end of that exposure right there in the heart of the Milky Way. That is a 30-second exposure. I believe I had it, the aperture at 3 point. I didn't have it at the 4.5. It wasn't at 3.2. It was the next one up is where I was getting the best results. And then I think the ISO was at 3200 or so. But that's the best astro picture I've ever gotten with it, and it's not bad, but that's about as good as it's going to get. Finally, let's just do like a little testimony on this bad boy. This thing is 2 years old. The abuses I put it through, the 3 or 4 or 5 most notable instances is when I was in Big Sur, California coast. I was, for reasons I'd rather not discuss, barefoot trying to wade across a waist deep lime kiln creek to head up to the double waterfall. I had this camera in one hand, barefoot, waist deep, fast moving water, went down. This went underwater for 2 or 3 seconds before I was able to thrust my arm back up and get it out of the water. So it was completely submerged for a couple of seconds. After I took it all apart and let it dry out, no rice or anything, just let it dry out, it kept taking pictures. Fell off of a really cheap tripod once. Buy good tripods, y'all. Tripod head broke, middle of the night, top of Talamina Scenic Drive, trying to do some astrophotography, fell to the ground, bounced and rolled 20 or 30 feet down a steep incline on pavement. Still taking pictures. Dropped it last year on some pavement and shattered the CPL, circular polarizer. That's another good reason to actually have filters on them, is you can protect your primary lens. But shattered that CPL, but the lens survived. Still taking pictures. Dropped it numerous times. I use this thing. Like, I don't just mess around. I use this thing. And the best pictures you have to go after. And like a lot of times you're going to trip or fall or something. You know, it's hard to protect these when you're out there kind of shooting on the fly and moving in those situations. So this thing's honestly kind of built like a tank. If we're being completely honest, I would not have expected it to have survived really any of those except for maybe one, but the three combined, and it's still taking really good pictures. Honestly, the last 3 or 4 that you saw, all the long exposures, were taken after all of the major drops and all of the major abuses that happened to it, so it's still taking good pictures. Overall overview, this is, like, for me, in my mind, the perfect this is the perfect camera for the newbie who wants to see if they can really get into photography. And of course, like I say, Nikon, Kodak, anything middle of the road is a great way for you to break into it, because what these are going to do, they're not so advanced that you're not going to just be able to point, shoot, and take an awesome picture. You're going to have to learn a little bit about the art, a little bit about the science behind photography, and it's going to make you a better photographer when you do win the lottery someday or take up robbing liquor stores and you can afford a professional model camera. They're great for that, and they do have most of the functionality. You can use this and learn all about how to do long exposure, and it's going to force you to learn how to use everything, not just the settings here, but the available light, the angles. They're great for that. This camera specifically, though, the one I am testifying to right here, is an EOS Rebel T6. It's 2 years old. It's been to hell and back with me. It's taken all kinds of abuse. It's still taking great pictures. You can't ask for much more than that out of the box $350 camera kit. It's been a great camera. That's really all there is to it, and it gets a lot of high praise from me, to be completely honest. Someday, yeah, I'll go to a pro camera when I actually successfully knock off a liquor store or win the lottery. But for now, I mean, honestly, it's a great camera. And I think that's going to wrap it up. This got way long. But I hope that there was useful information for you in this, because I had a lot of trouble discovering when I first got into it what I could do with the different cameras, what I needed. Hopefully this gives you an idea of what a middle of the road prosumer, right out of the box stock camera can do for you, and you can do with it, and see if that fits in with what you're trying to do. And I hope that you found it useful. And if you did find it useful and you stayed with me this long through all my long-winded rambling, I would appreciate it if you would like, and if you would subscribe. Specifically, subscribe is the biggie. That helps grow the channel the most. If you want to know anything more about any of the projects I've got going on, you can go to waywardstories.com. That is the nexus of information for all things that I'm working on. Keep your ears on. The podcast is coming soon. I've got a lot of episodes in the can. I'm going to do a bulk drop to get some stuff out there for people to binge soon, the next few months. that project's getting close to where I want it to be. So we got a lot going on. I appreciate all you guys' support. The channel continues to grow. It gives me something to do. Really appreciate you guys watching. I hope that you guys will stick with me. Like, subscribe, share, all the good things. And yeah, we'll catch you guys in the next video. Thanks for watching.